I did political organizing, nonprofit work, and we're moving more and more into the digital space and realizing in particular the need. Our company now and our nonprofits, we do a lot in big data. We do, and a lot of times people say, oh, you do a lot of data analytics. And I always push away from that because data analytics assumes that you take the data and the answers are found in the data. And what we always look for is where the holes are. And I think those are where the most important pieces and answers exist. It's what's missing, and in particular, who's missing and why. And from kind of in our society, in our economies, and our politics, it's the least valued members of our community that are missing in the data. And that's where we focus. But part of what I'm going to talk about too is who's least valued. It depends on the lens that you're looking through. And one of, I think, the biggest challenges with our data today in the digital world, and so many of the things we see breaking, is because we compartmentalize people. And so to get back to kind of who we all are in this circle and what we feel called to be, like fundamentally for me, this is about an attempt to understand people as like all children of God. And in the politics that we work in some of the spaces that we work in that can be deeply dark even, realizing that kind of everybody is worth fighting for, and at least there's a chance for redemption, and not going into, oh, they're this category and we're going to label them this category, because that's always harmful in existence with others. But in the data space, and I'm going to tell a lot of stories about this, it can be especially harmful because it is so delineating that when we decide someone is this group only or primarily, it teaches systems. It compartmentalizes them in a way that they cannot, it is impossible for the math to move them out of oftentimes. And so again, for me, one of the seminal moments in my evolution through this was we were working, it was about the same time that we were working with David at Bread, but it was actually on a more climate related issue. And this was when we were making a real push to, a little bit of backstory, after leaving divinity school and Duke and my public policy degree, I went to the Hill. I worked for Senator Kennedy on the health committee, then for Congressman David Price, who was a Yale Div grad, did appropriations work, and then did all the Democratic faith outreach work in 2006 that was very successful, applying a lot of the things we're doing now digitally at a kind of old school classic organizing perspective. But it was the foundation of what we do now with algorithms and communication. Of I came in, and whether it was dumb luck or providence, hit this historical sweet spot as a late 20-year-old with hardly any campaign experience. Of the 2004 election was defined as the God gap year, and 2000, so many things have come back circle. But in 2004, the best indicator someone was going to vote for Bush was not that they were a registered Republican, but that they went to church on a weekly basis. And it led to, to that election outcome. Democrats were out of power everywhere. They were desperate to try to figure out a better solution. They realized they needed to make inroads back into the faith community. But they hadn't tried in so long, they didn't have ideas. And so as again, 20-something with little experience, but I had worked the 2004 election. We ended up on all the biggest races of 2006. I was in kind of the inner circle, senior teams, in the race, Casey against Santorum, Governor Sebelius, Ted Strickland, Sherrod Brown. We did Michigan, Ohio, we did North Carolina, we did Kansas. And we won Kansas. There was a famous book at that time called What's the Matter with Kansas that was written that has a lot of parallels to the same conversation liberals are having now. And the basic premise was, why are these people in Kansas so stupid to vote against their own economic self-interest? Don't they realize voting for Democrats, they'd make more money if they voted for Democrats? We're the ones that care about their economics. And I remember when it came out, Senator Kennedy told me, he said, you know, it's interesting when I read this stuff. I'm the richest member of the Senate. Every Democrat in the Senate votes against their self-interest every time we vote on any tax or economic policy, and we're lauded for that. Like, there is nothing wrong. In fact, it is laudable for people to vote against their self-interest because they have a higher interest. And our problem is when people in Kansas don't believe we support their moral interests, when they don't understand how we will better support their families and things they care most about, that's not their problem, that's our problem. And 2 years after What's the Matter with Kansas happened, we won Kansas, won the governor, won the statewide race, because there wasn't anything the matter with Kansas. It was that Democrats weren't listening. And everywhere we went, I had a rule which was kind of revolutionary. I told candidates, you cannot talk. We are going to go to meetings and there's no stump speeches. You get to sit around, we do a circle like this one, and listen. And we'd have someone else host and ask questions, and they would listen. And through these programs and outreach, going to Christian radio, et cetera, we were able to flip, compared to even other Democrats, the Protestant vote, we flipped 20 points in all of our races, Catholic vote by 15. 2 years after George Bush won Ohio and the presidency on the back of the evangelical vote, Ted Strickland won the evangelical vote in Ohio. We beat Santorum, who is being set up as the next presidential lead. And we did all of it by showing up and listening. That then led me, I was lead consultant on the Red to Blue in 2008 for Democrats. And 40 congressional pickups, all through a lot of these same techniques. And then we won, and Democrats had filibuster-proof majorities in the House, Senate, and we had the White House. And in 2008, we had, there were 22 state parties that had paid staff, Democrat parties, that had paid field staff for faith outreach. And most of those were people that I trained and came out of our programs. And Democrats came into power, the Obama people came in, and we decided we won history. And we didn't need to speak to those people anymore. Every one of those state programs was shut down. By 2009, there were the only one that was, there's no more funding for it. And only Michigan had a field staff that the party chair insisted on paying out of his budget. And that lasted for another 2 years. And I was sitting in all these meetings and kept being told, our data is showing us those people would never vote for us anymore. And I was like, but they just did. Like, and so there's got to be, how can, like, there's something wrong with the data. We're missing something because we're in this position because they voted for us. But the way we were categorizing and defining and the limits in our data was driving all those decisions. And so that was one of it, that for me was a key point where our mission has always been align what's right with what works. Doing faith and politics, coming out of divinity school, the realization that I would have to figure out how to navigate in the gray was something I wrestled with. It was a lot of my study in school, was kind of how to prepare as best I could for what are, it's there. In the Bible, there's the court prophets and the wilderness prophets. You all know this, and we need both. The wilderness prophets, sit outside and call us to our highest purpose of what might be, and the court prophets have to kind of navigate in the corrupted and difficult systems. I think these days it's often easier, you don't have to wear scratchy clothes and eat bugs anymore to be a wilderness prophet. You can sit in social media and have things in black and white, but the harder challenges are to kind of dig into the broken systems that exist and try to navigate through them. And after pushing on the politics side and realizing I just wasn't going to get anywhere anymore, we were starting to get kind of pushed out of some of the inner circles as well, said, well, how can we make this better? And so we started building data around the core values that motivate people to come together in the world. And that led us to this point where we were building this data, and I was watching our dashboard. It was like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and it was lighting up, and there were 2 million people on my screen. What I was seeing were millions of moments of hope and intent. And I was seeing connections that they didn't see. They were doing that all in the same moment, in common purpose. And as you have done the church history, probably know kind of the church's concept of the Eucharist early on in communion, and why we even use some of that language in English now, is they believe that kind of when you took communion, you were literally transported out of time into space to be in communion with all the saints. We have an opportunity, it truly is removed from time and space. And that, like, if you preach a sermon now, you spend all your time, you do all your prep, you show up, you pray carefully about trying to deliver the best message possible. There may be someone sitting in the pews who needs that message 2 years from now. And the limitations on time and space that we have in a lot of our current structure are degraded some in this digital area that in this age that we're entering. That sermon you preached next week can be available not just 2 years from now, but a lot of what we do can be available in the moment that they need it. And we are all leaving markers in our data trails, which can be fully anonymized, that allow those messages and those needs to be met in the different moments, and to bring together that common intent in ways that have never been done before.
What I'd like you to do before we turn off the record is look in the camera and tell those folks, how do we use digital technology to change the politics of poverty in our country?
We use it by answering questions instead of telling people what to do. People, at the most basic level, search is a question. And nearly universally, we are not using that the most simple of tools, and then everything that builds off the back of it, all of our digital tools, to answer people's questions. Think about COVID, poverty, etc. We are telling people what we think they need to know. We are not answering the questions they are asking. And this is, it is especially problematic in the ivory tower in progressive communities, of saying, this is what you need to know. If people would only realize this about the vaccine, and you shouldn't be asking those questions. Why are you reading that stuff? Why, you shouldn't ask that. This is what Fauci said. Well, answer their darn question. Give them what they need to make the decision. We saw this with COVID, and I'll finish with one of the case studies. We ended up in a place where we were able to work during COVID on a rapid response large-scale population clinical trial to try to identify seroprevalence, is the, again, complicated scientific word. It was How many people have COVID in the community? And how many people have had COVID in this community? It was in New Orleans. They had been in lockdown and they were just about to come out of lockdown. So there was this rush to get this study done before lockdown ended so they'd have a baseline to see what growth happened afterwards. And that was the only reason we got brought in. We'd never done clinical trials before, but they had to do something quick and our tools allowed that possibility. And so I came in not being a scientist, but saying, hey, you all said you want to do a sample. I remember stats. And coming and said, hey, they said, can you do this? Yes, I think we can find these people. From our census work, we knew how to answer and speak into moments. And we'd done some work in New Orleans. So I think I can do it. And like, we're looking at the interest in data, and I'm pretty confident we'll be able to get you a fully representative sample of your population by all your demographic measures. And they literally laughed. And it was this like virtual pat on the head. That's really cute and sweet. And we love that's where you're starting from, because we want this to be as representative a sample as possible. But, Black people just don't participate. Like no one ever gets this in clinical trials. They just don't do it. And so if you can make it as representative possible, that's great. But also, please let's make sure we don't, like, we got to get this done. So we can't have the trial fail because this becomes an absolute. And we went back and we were kind of, I'm white, but I was kind of pissed by that. And we were looking at the data and we saw the demand, and I'm like, no, it reminded me again of the Obama people saying these people will never vote for us. It's like, they're saying they want this. I can see it in their behavior. We're going to get this right. And a lot of different pieces. The best illustration of what happened was we'd also, through our census work, realized how often single moms are left out of everything. So we said, we're not just going to do the darn demographics. We're going to get the groups that are always left out of these. And if you're talking about how to do reopening safely, we can't leave parents out of that equation. So we set a goal of we got to get single moms in this thing. And it ended up being that we had a 2,500 person sample. We had 2,000 single moms sign up to participate. And we exceeded all of our demographic targets. The NIH had done a study the year before looking at all of their peer-reviewed sample populations. And it was just on the best way to recruit African Americans. So they looked at only peer-reviewed publications that said, this is how you do it right. You should learn from how we do it because this will make your recruitment more representative and better. And the best they found, the best of all those studies, undercounted the Black community by half. The average was undercounting by 2/3 of their share of the population. These were the ones being lifted up as the models. And we exceeded our Black targets, we exceeded our Hispanic targets. And we didn't do it because I'm some magical, I speak to those people like, oh, I know how to get Black people to turn out. No, we did it because I didn't think I knew how to get Black people to turn out, but I did know how to listen to Black people. And I knew how to listen to what was being expressed in the needs of these single moms. And the way clinical trials are always done, the best practice is a randomized study. We got in a big fight with Lancet. They're peer reviewers on this because they said, you didn't do a fully randomized address-based study. This is the only way to make sure you have a representative sample. It's like, you have not published a representative sample in your darn high impact review journal. We have one because we did it differently, where if you send out a mailer 2 months in advance to a random group and say, do you want to sign up for a study in 2 months? You are not giving everybody an equal chance. You are guaranteeing that there are significant segments of that group that will never have the chance because they cannot schedule their lives that far in advance. They don't know, they don't have the resources to make that choice. We got the 2,000 single moms because we gave them the opportunity the night before the test. They weren't saying, how can I join a clinical trial? They were looking for what they could do to help their kids stay ahead and catch up when they were in daycare all day. They were looking for what they could do to keep their family safe when even during lockdown, they were working front-end jobs. And the reality was they were not getting very many good answers. And we gave them something and said, hey, do you want to find out if you have COVID? Do you want to find out if you have had COVID? You can get tested for free tomorrow. And they jumped at that. And then we went further because we knew their schedule and we saw their kind of the behavior patterns. And we said, as soon as they signed up, we sent them automated text that was, and we know life happens. If you need to reschedule, just let us know. We expect you to have to reschedule. And we didn't make them call and say, I can't make the appointment. We gave them the ability to just say, I can't make it. Can't make it. Can I reschedule just by text and avoid that guilt, that shame, or that time that was required to even do that step. And 2/3 of the people that came on a reschedule. And so David, like those two pieces in that study, that can happen all over the place again and again and again. And when it comes to poverty, when it comes to serving these communities, it means shifting to serving instead of telling. It means listening. It means doing this in person too, obviously, but it is taking that, and the same way you'd sit with someone in hospice, the same way you'd sit with someone in any kind of crisis situation, you don't just lecture at them. You listen to them, and sometimes you just be with them. We can do that at mass scale, and giving them the things that they're looking for keeps them out of disinformation. It brings them back into community. It gives them a sense as they cry into the void, is anybody listening? Does anybody care? That someone does hear and see them. And that is what allows them. We cannot get people out of poverty. That's not our choice. We didn't get Black people vaccinated. We don't even in the COVID stuff, see, oh yes, because we built this out. No, we didn't. They did it. We didn't do it from our positions of power and authority. What we can do is be with them and try to create the same opportunities for them that a different segment of our society has so often that we never see them.